Okay, I think it says we're live. So people were asking, so what are we even talking about? So I want to do a series on metaethics, but I don't want it to be a series that people turn off to right away, because I think that morality is something people care about. And it's really interesting because I got so many people going, I'll sit this one out. Oh, I'll watch from the sidelines. Nah, I'm not so sure I really want to be in it, but I'm really interested in the subject. And I think that is at least a little bit indicative of the fact that this is important. But so I wanted to start with just realism and anti-realism because those are familiar terms to all of us because we've heard those ones being thrown around. But eventually I want to really talk about all of metaethics, right? So cognitivism, non-cognitivism, error theory, and where they fit in with one another. But I don't think this is the hangout where we should do that, because that, I think, will turn people off. So with that being said, I don't know if you guys read the conversation I had with Alex in PM. I posted it with his permission. Did anybody get a chance to read that?
Yeah, I read that.
I did, yeah.
Okay. Does anybody sympathize with me in those questions I was asking him?
Yes.
All right. So I think that's sort of one of the things that's at the bottom of this realism versus anti-realism business is sort of what does real even mean? And, what are you saying, that there are actual properties of wrongness out in the world? And that kind of thing that makes somebody want to turn off of realism. So I think that we could start this without bothering about classifying and categorizing and organizing or proper definitions or anything like that. Hopefully when Alex gets back, or somebody else is in here, CK can become our dictionary if Alex can't make it back. But I like the way that the conversation between me and Alex started going. And I think that would be a good way to start this. So,
can I get a link to the transcript you're referring to?
Oh, yeah, yes. I'm wondering if Steve, if you can find that more easily and quicker than me.
Yeah, I'll
how fast you found the YouTube thing. Okay, so let's start this off with this idea, and that we have in us kind of want or desire or leaning towards wanting to say that, for example, pick an easy one, murder is wrong, is true. There's something about that sentence that I think we all want to feel like it's true. So let's start there. I mean, does anybody feel like, isn't anything you feel like saying?
I think it isn't true.
I think it isn't true as well.
Okay. What about, do you think that there is an inkling in us, an urge, a desire for us to feel like it's true?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I think that the realist, and here, Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that the realist acknowledges this urge and says, well, if it's true, and we all feel like it's true, what is it that makes it true? There must be something in the world that's causing us to think that murder is wrong is true.
It's pragmatic.
That starts you down towards the realism path. Right? Now, I'm really interested in the people who think already it's not true. So maybe CK, you could talk about that.
Well, I think, well, there's a few things. One is that I don't think that there's going to be one answer across the entire species. So some people will think it's true and some people won't. And I think whether or not someone thinks it's true is going to depend on further factors in a lot of instances. So I might consider it right to murder someone in certain situations and wrong in others, for example.
Could I
actually, if I can give another anti-realist kind of position. So the thing is, while I say I'm a moral anti-realist, I'm not even sure if I'm using the term correctly, because morality just gets so complicated once you get into it for a while. Let me turn my camera on real quick. Trying to get a good way to phrase it. I guess rather than everyone agreeing that something is right or wrong, it's more like we all share preferences to a certain degree. There's an exception here or there, but we all generally agree we shouldn't murder, we shouldn't kill people for certain reasons. But those are preferences. There may be a vast we might share a particular instinct for things that can come into play, but in the end, they are just preferences. It doesn't say that because we share preference, we ought to do something. It's hard to get the ought from it. To the point where I don't think you can, not without some assumptions that we all share. So yeah, well, right off the bat, I don't think anything is, despite the fact that I will still use the terminology of a moral realist, I don't really think that there are any moral facts that don't rely on some assumptions that we can't really justify.
Yeah, just one thing to add. Sorry.
Oh, I was actually just gonna. I was actually just
say the Max.
Yeah, I think what I take the moral realist position to be, I think, is slightly different than what Helen had described. I take it to be the view that there are external categorical norms that exist that are reason-giving for people to act in a certain way. I don't think it necessarily is the idea that we have particular feelings, and upon acknowledging those feelings, we seek an explanation for why we have those feelings and what it would mean for those feelings to be true.
Do you think that going about it that way, looking for a reason for why our feelings are the way they are, is a bad way to go about it?
Well, I think you'd end up answering a different question, which is why this particular organism, meaning human beings, have these particular dispositions or these particular feelings on the whole towards certain things. But I don't think that I would consider that more of a scientific, even a biological question about us as a species, rather than something that advances the view that there are moral facts, to use the term that I think it was JD used.
So Max, you wanted to say?
Oh yes, I also wanted to throw in something. When it comes to the realism, anti-realism thing, even though an anti-realist might say that moral propositions aren't true, the discourse could still be validated in another sense. Like, for example, even if mathematical statements aren't true, they're still instrumental in us, and in a lot of cases for us understanding scientific theories. So the metaphysical stuff doesn't really matter, even if we get things like stealing is bad is just stealing, boo. It's still worthwhile for us to turn those into moral propositions and treat them as if they were real, even if they have no underlying metaphysical truth-giving property to them.
Yeah, but what makes them worthwhile is the fact that it's advantageous, the fact that it provides us with an advantage to promoting ourselves and our people around us, our species and everything. So it gives us an advantage to believe they're true, that it's a worthwhile maxim almost of having some basic things like not murdering other people because those other people or friends of that person you've just murdered might come and murder you, and you're going to potentially damage your own well-being and the well-being of those around you. So it's a pragmatic approach. It's like JD was saying, it's about a preference that you've acquired as a result of evolutionary selection, that doing other things, certainly in certain circumstances, is not advantageous to you to do. And so it's the advantage that you gain from having it that makes it worthwhile. So yes, I think it's practically useful, but that doesn't mean to say that these things exist. And
that's why I kind of likened it to mathematics. Even if mathematics doesn't have any justifiable metaphysical truth to it, if there's nothing that makes a mathematical statement true, it's still necessary for us to do our best science. So,
But you can
even
you can say mathematically true because sorry, I'll be back just too quickly, CK. Yeah, but you can say, I mean, you only need to start off mathematics by saying things like I've got 2 rocks, and if I have 2 more rocks, I end up with 4 rocks. And once you've got some basic properties of addition and subtraction and things, then you can start doing dividing and multiplying. And then before you know where you are, you're integrating calculus and you're flying to the moon. We're using the theory that's been provided by that. So you, from a very basic beginning, you can generate mathematics deductively. That's not the case with morals.
well, first of all, when it comes, I'm just using that as an example. I don't want to make this into a philosophy of math discussion, but a philosopher of math could contest, well, there are imaginary numbers, there are numbers that have, and systems that have no corollaries in the physical world, so on and so forth, and they're just arbitrary rules that happen to work for scientific theories. But regardless, the point still stands that the enterprise of morals would still have just as much practical use to us. Not maybe on the scale of math, but it would resemble math in terms that we need it to function in our day-to-day lives. Like, that's the only point I'm making.
Yes, pragmatic, yes.
Yeah.
Well, even that type of pragmatic justification would presuppose certain names that some people wouldn't share.
Yes, I mean, obviously there's different approaches. I mean, and also the thing is, what makes it good? I mean, I think there are sort of 3 ways of measuring whether something is good or not, and that's because we wouldn't accept that individuals have the right to do that. Because I mean, if a murderer decides that murdering people is right, we would say no, he can't do that. So then it becomes a society declaring what's right and wrong, and that also can get abducted by special interest groups and people who have want to manipulate the rest of society, a hegemony or something that decides, we've got the moral rights and we can start dictating to other people what's moral or not into our advantage. So there's no way of objectively defining what's right and wrong from a society's point of view. And then there's our sort of evolutionary biology, which says, well, actually, we like flourishing, etc., etc. And then if we've got empathy, then we can understand that someone else would like that too, and that's useful to us because they can reciprocate, so it becomes pragmatic. So you can say the pragmatic side of it is founding on whether something's good or bad. But those 3 ways I've just described of potentially describing what's good or bad, they're all pretty limp. There's no real objective justification for them. So therefore. And also, this other thing I was interested in is how I believe if you can show that a moral thing is moral, like something like murder is wrong is true, by saying something is true, it seems to me that you've also defined that thing exists. It's a fact. And if you, given this is about moral facts, I think this debate, if you can show that something is true, as a consequence, a logical consequence of that, therefore there must be a fact out there. So therefore, that's why I'm against the murder is wrong is true.
That's the part that gets me, right? So if we're going to say there's a moral fact, then there's something in the world that makes it a fact. It means that there have to be moral properties, right? So now we're talking about moral properties? That just, to me, seems hard to swallow.
There are other ways of justifying it. For example, I've actually found recently that in trying to find a justification for ethics or ethical statements, if we're in a metaphysical discourse, maybe it's only because our truth commitments push us there, or what standard we give to what is considered true. Consider a corollary in the philosophy of science. If you were to ask someone like Bas van Fraassen what makes a good scientific theory, he wouldn't say it's because it's true. He'd say, well, a scientific theory is a good one because they're empirically adequate according to the methods we set out and what we look for in a scientific theory. Well, what if we just said empirical adequacy was true, was going to be our mark for truth? That's what we meant by it. Well, likewise, the moral realist could go with the theory of truth, wherein values could be just as justified as facts of the matter.
That would be a problem. Have to deal with the is-ought problem, and I think that would be a fundamentally for me it would be a major problem. And I think before that, when what Rumpus said, when we're trying to equate morality to things about evolutionary biology like survival or something like that, I think what it kind of asked the question like G. Moore asked with the open question why is that quality whatever human force or something good? And it would seem as if we were talking about the semantic thesis of morality in terms of the open question, if you were to say that what is good is like analytically equivalent definitionally to human flourishing, it would seem that it's not, because it seems like a meaningful question. It doesn't seem if I were to ask you why is human flourishing the good, it doesn't seem like asking why is a bachelor an unmarried man. It doesn't seem to be. It seems to be meaningful, which would mean that they're not analytically equivalent. So I think the problem with the first thing, like what Maximus said, is that you're just going to have run straight into Hume's guillotine, and then the other one is just you run into all of the objections to ethical naturalism.
Well, first of all,
Okay.
let's just parse out a little of what you said there. First with the is-ought distinction, because
I was hoping that we could have Alex. We often refer to the is-ought distinction. Maybe we could have Alex sort of lay it out real plain before we continue.
Yay.
Is that for us, Alex?
I don't know if I have very much to say about it, to be honest. Moral philosophy has never been something I've spent any time researching in any depth or really thinking about in any detail. It's not something that, it's not one of those areas of philosophy that ever really captured my interest. Like philosophy of mind. I don't really care about philosophy of mind.
That's just amazing.
Well, I mean, philosophy is such a broad set of often completely separate subjects that are just bundled together because often there's just no room for them in other departments or something. So the guy who sits in one office doing ethics and the guy who sits next to him doing logic may have nothing in common, methodologically with one another. I mean, I did read Hume. I'm not sure. So what Hume's basically saying, well, putting it in the Humean context probably doesn't really matter so much, but I suppose the general idea is something like you've got standard kind of categorical facts that just relate the way that things are to some extent. Like, this glass has some Baileys, not whiskey, in it tonight. Or the table is made of wood. I'm in the UK, something like that. Those categorical facts are entirely devoid of any normativity. They don't tell you that you should do something. And the idea is that there's no combination of those types of categorical facts that can ever jump from being a descriptive categorical fact to add in this new element of normativity, of like requiring something of an agent. There doesn't seem to be any combination of statements about the way that the world is that can ever get you there. That's basically the is-ought problem. If you've got this kind of chasm, on the one hand you've got descriptions, or categorical value-free descriptions about the way the world is, and on the other hand then you've got these moral statements that say, such and such is bad, so and so ought to do this, that type of thing, that you can't build this out of these. But that's essentially the is-ought problem.
Right. So if you take an example of sort of just somebody like me just sort of walking around and someone, and I haven't thought about any of this, but I think that you shouldn't do any harm, right? And someone says, well, why not? And I go, well, it hurts other people. Okay, that's true. So what? So I want to say, well, it's wrong to hurt other people. But going from, and I can stick in as many descriptive facts about the way it hurts people or what it means to be hurt or anything like that, and I still can't conclude from as big of a detailed list as I can describing what hurting someone is. I can't jump to, therefore we shouldn't do it, without sticking in another thing, like that is a normative, I guess, premise or something, before I can conclude anything.
Yeah, it's like
it's wrong to do that.
Right, you could just go back to a point where you say something like, oh, you shouldn't torture that cat or something, and they say, well, why not? And you might say something like, well, you shouldn't torture anything. Well, why not? Well, because you shouldn't do anything that hurts anything. Why not? after a point you get to such a general principle, you shouldn't do anything not good or something. Like, and then it's, well, why not? And you just go think doing the good is like, there is no foundation further than that. I can't give you any other normative statement about why you shouldn't do that. And there's no description that you can say about, well, because it's Tuesday, or because this table is made of wood, or because I'm in the UK. None of those things will ever come close to saying why. You may bottom out at some kind of what you think of as a primitive moral fact, but it seems like you can't really ever get a descriptive fact that would play.
It's almost like a
role.
properly basic belief, isn't it? Along with the logic.
You're essentially trying to get a prime mover of metaethics. A metaethical statement which starts off all other ethical statements. One thing to note about the is-ought distinction is, while that is a problem for moral naturalists, people who believe that moral properties are just segments of natural properties, this distinction actually doesn't hurt and is accepted by moral non-naturalists, moral Platonists, for example, who believe that moral rules are just part of the structure of the universe. They're just like mathematical statements, and this is actually a view defended by a decent number of ethical philosophers.
And those are very silly people indeed.
Yes, I think they're very silly as well.
It's not right. I'm sure there's an argument for this role card. Just hearing the bare bones version, like, wait, that just feels wrong.
Yeah.
I would agree with Maximus there, where the ethical non-naturalists wouldn't fall victim to those same problems. But I think that was just in response to saying that we could just boil them down to some empirical facts, like
exactly.
We could.
Exactly.
But I think
the reason why I bring this up is because if morality requires some kind of truth maker, something in its own right, then they could say, well, value statements have these kinds of truth makers, a kind of platonic or abstract thing which they correspond to. Matters of description or matters of fact that we use to day, they have more of a physical thing or physical properties corresponding to it.
I just think all... Go ahead, Rumpus.
Remind me what a truth maker is, Max?
I'm sorry?
Remind me what a truth maker is.
Okay, a truth maker is something which makes the proposition true in light of its existence and something false in absence of its existence.
Right.
Something in the world making your statement true.
Yeah, something that exists outside of you.
Yeah, to me...
One thing about moral naturalism, though, is that I think the moral naturalist is committed to saying that the naturalistic fallacy or the is-ought gap are not legitimate.
Exactly.
I just feel like all moral talk terminates at what is essentially a subjective value. Basically, I have a preference. Whatever reasons I have for that preference, everything will terminate there. And I really want to find a way out of that, but so far I haven't been able to.
Well, my own professor, Gail Fellenberg, actually has a pretty decent response. If you look at ethics and how it's developed, it's mostly developed outside. Well, it's mostly developed in the academics inside a religious framework for thousands of years. Whereas if you look at other academic disciplines, while they do have some history within the church, they've actually had an ample amount of time to be successful on their own. They had hundreds of years to develop outside of that context and within their own departments at that. Consider that we have a world wherein we have huge numbers of people with their own interesting and very different cosmology, many of which contradict one another. Well, but we have our own cosmology, and we think that it's scientific and it meets good epistemic requirements. And the others don't, because they don't really have a good methodology in which to reach the conclusions that we've done through science. So it's possible that the problem there is more of trying to build a normative ethic, something that helps us and anyone to determine what's right or wrong, as opposed to something on the metaethical level.
I think I'm lost.
Yeah, I'm not.
A lot of us lost the thread there for some reason.
In short, the reason why ethics hasn't really developed is because there's no methodology in which we've all built that helps us arrive at good conclusions that anyone can look into, as opposed to cosmology, wherein we actually have applied a good science to it and it's one where we're no longer getting a whole world of many people coming up with their own interesting and contrary cosmologies.
Yeah, because I mean, the cosmology there is a reality out there which we can match against the various proposals, and we can find objectively which one is correct. But I mean, moral realists can't even identify. I think, as described in that Stanford description of moralism, there's no method by which you can arrive at a particular. You've got a problem. Arrive at a moral fact and define whether something is true or not. Let alone the fact they exist. I mean, it doesn't even get off the starting blocks.
Well, I mean, as long as
that's an epistemic problem.
Yeah, that's kind of tangential to the.
I don't think
issue.
I don't think the cosmology analogy is a very suitable one, just because I don't think the question of whether or not moral facts exist is a scientific question.
Let me jump back like the most basic thing we can bring up, which is what do we mean when we say morality? Because I've actually heard definitions that I had a talk. Well, Hogtie was on. It was a Talk to Tuesday episode, and we were bringing up morality. And one of the things was that divine command theory doesn't even feel like morality, since the most common usage has to do with benefits and harms. Whereas then divine command says, well, intents and harms are relevant. You're doing what you're told.
Well, I think what it means,
like, is there a definition we have to use, or are there basically other words we should be using for things that are not having to do with harms and benefits? Because I've actually heard stuff. I mean, kind of like the underlying framework kind of smuggled in, like morality is how we should treat each other better. Like, well, hold on, I thought it was just how we should treat each other. It seems like something gets smuggled in there. So.
Yeah.
Well, I think what it means for morality to exist is simply that there are external categorical norms that exist.
I don't know about that. Alex, what did
Oh,
you
no,
want to say?
TK, he was talking about moral semantics, and you're jumping to moral ontology. He was asking the question, not what is the nature of the good. He was asking you, what do ethical statements mean? And so
Yeah, I think Seamus is on that there. Yeah.
I think that when we try to defend like the semantic thesis of like moral propositions, it seems like the first thing that jumps into my head would be like I would use something like the open question to show that the semantic meaning to any naturalistic semantic understanding, that you can't boil down goodness into any naturalistic quality. So
the open question thing from Moore isn't. I mean, it does go by the name of the naturalistic fallacy, but it doesn't. It's not to suppose that a supernatural reinterpretation of what morality means is okay. I mean, it cuts off any account of what the good is in terms of anything else. So you can't, if the argument works, you can't say that it means maximizing happiness or something. And you also can't say that it means doing God's will or something. The good has to be utterly undefinable if that argument goes through. So it's called the naturalistic fallacy, but really it means saying, it's like trying to forbid you defining the good in any other term. So for Moore, the good is just an undefinable primitive. It can't be cashed out in terms of anything else whatsoever. And that's his argument why. Because whenever you do try and cash it out in terms of something else, you can always say something like,
so what?
Is that good? Is that good? Is it good to maximize happiness or something like that? Why is it?
I know, but that's the open question, not the naturalistic fallacy. I think you're confusing the two. The naturalistic fallacy is saying that if there's some quality like goodness that always some quality like pleasantness or desirability that always follows goodness, the fact that they refer to the same thing or refer to the same set doesn't mean they're equivalent. That's what the naturalistic fallacy is. The open question is just saying that there's an analytical distinction that's meaningful when we ask why some naturalistic property is the good, and it doesn't seem to be meaningless. Which would, if it was meaningless, it would show that it was analytically equivalent.
So I thought the first one was called the genetic fallacy, the one that you outlined to begin with.
No, on my understanding, the naturalistic fallacy says if there are certain qualities that invariably always accompany what we know as goodness. So let's say that what we know as goodness always comes with a quality known as like pleasantness or desirability, right? So these things may refer to the same set, right? And that may be true. but it would be wrong to say that they're equivalent just by virtue that they refer to the same set. Doesn't mean that they're equivalent, and that's what the naturalistic fallacy is.
Well, I did a quick Google search, and the naturalistic fallacy does seem to be it's by more, and apparently it is at least closely related to the is-ought problem, if not synonymous.
That's right. Yeah.
Mm. The is-ought problem is about describing how to get values from matters of fact, whereas the naturalistic fallacy is how do you save moral propositions just from being and from tautologies.
Can I just what's the objective of this hangout?
To get our feet
to confuse me as much as possible.
Yeah, exactly. To stay confused, to get our feet wet into metaethics without getting too technical, and to
Failed.
try.
Yeah,
It has
Really?
failed.
Too technical. Okay, where was I?
Well, but then
and to get a general feel for realism versus non-realism, and maybe talk also about anti.
I don't think that Maximus characterized, when you're talking about tautologies, you're talking about, well, in terms of the semantic thesis, you're talking about things that are analytically equivalent, which would be the open question, not the naturalistic fallacy.
Okay, but that is a distinction that we're going to save for another hangout.
Yeah, I think given what Helen has said, I think it would be probably a better approach to first explain what the two positions are, and then maybe talk about what the arguments are for each of them, or objections are to each of them.
Yes.
Because we're moving to a lot of material that falls quite far outside of the question of moral realism versus anti-realism.
Well, what would be like a bare bones definition of each? Maybe we could start there. I've understood anti-realism to be there are no moral facts.
And Max can't be the one to ask or to answer.
All right.
Well, if moral realism presupposes...
Is that close when I say anti-realism, there are no moral
I think
facts?
moral
Like
realism...
morality, moral talk doesn't fit to true or false categories into right or wrong?
Oh, okay. So we're gonna get. I tend to agree with you, but we're going to get Alex to try to give us two basic definitions first, and then we'll move from there.
Okay.
And
So
I just one quick chip in. I think as a consequence of that, if you say there aren't any moral facts, you can never say murder is wrong is true, because I think if that proposition has a true result, then I don't believe therefore there can be there would be a moral fact as a consequence of that, I think.
Okay, but let's start with Alex, and then, because I think you're probably right, but that's something that we can talk about. So Alex, give us the two basic.
Okay, so I mean, ordinarily, right, realism is not something that's just talked about in terms of ethics or morality, right? You can be realist or non-realist about mathematics or modality or whatever. There's loads of categories of weird things that philosophers have thought about, and the realism, anti-realism debate goes on in all of these. It's just kind of classic metaphysical distinction that you could have, regardless of the subject matter. So normally, if you can say normally in these contexts, so you'd say something like the realist is committed to kind of two kind of theses. The first one would be something like the discourse, and you have to kind of say that there's some kind of central bit of discourse, the most important bit, these kind of existential claims that you're either explicitly or implicitly committed to by using these types of jargon that come with the subject matter that you're considering. That primarily you're saying that these things are truth apt. They're the types of things that can be true. And then secondly, the realist also says that they are true, these fundamental existential claims.
Some set of them are true, yeah.
Yeah, of course. So depending on the type of position that he's outlining, that there are some true statements, right? So for instance, you could be a realist about, say if you're a realist about possible worlds, just to pick a different example, just for the sake of having something else to play with for a second. You might say, if you're a realist about possible worlds, you take it when someone says there is a possible world where I'm 10 feet tall or something, that at least when they're saying that it's the type of sentence that could be considered true or false, right? Unlike go and get me a hamburger or something, which isn't the type of sentence which is true or false, right? It's a request. It's not true or false. When you're saying there is a possible world where such and such, at least it's a descriptive sentence we take it on face value that it is the type, we mean it in the way that it sounds, right? And then also the realist doesn't just say that. He also says, and obviously for at least some subset of those sentences, there is a possible world where such and such, that some of those are true, right? That's what it is to be a realist about possible worlds, is to say that that type of language should be taken at face value, and when it says things, at least some of the things that it says are actually true about it. Now, if we're looking at moral realism, it seems that the central claims that we're making is when we say things like murder is wrong, what we're doing implicitly there is referring to some kind of value, which is wrongness, sort of moral property or something like that. At least the structure of the sentence taken face value seems to just say, you know, murder is wrong is like saying rumpus is green or something, right? It's like a descriptive sentence on face value. It's got an object and it's ascribing a property to that thing. And if we're to say that these are truth apt, it's the type of thing that could be true, then we're not going to try and pass that away in some other terms, at least. This is what the realist would say. And then he'd say that some sentences like that seem to be implicitly referring to these kind of moral values as like real things, but at least some of those sentences are true. And when they refer to these things, they're successful. So the moral realist holds that moral terms are truth apt and that they're true. That's basically what it is to be a moral realist. Does that help?
Well, what about anti-realist then?
I thought those were
Where's
the
that fall?
distinctions between cognitivists. I think the moral realist wants to make one more thesis, besides that moral statements refer to propositions, and some of these are true. They also want to say that, or at least the robust realist wants to make a third thesis and say that what these things are true independent of what people think. So I think the first two just defines what cognitivism is, and then you have to give the third thesis to define what realism is.
Well, we're going to let that slide, because we're going to talk about cognitivism and non-cognitivism perhaps a little later, or maybe in another hang. Let's go to a brief description of anti-realism.
Do you want me to do that as well?
Of course.
We're working you, Alex.
So I also have some laundry needs doing. Can you get on that afterwards?
Do you need a beer, Alex?
Yeah.
You need scotch at this point.
This coffee cup's not going to fill itself.
All right. So if you take those views, I mean, there's nothing dogmatic about this, right? There's no reason why you can't have that third requirement in there as well. I mean, yeah, that seems perfectly reasonable as well, right? The realist holds that it's like mind-independent truths that they're talking about. Sure, why not? I'm quite happy to chuck that in the mix as well. And then the nice thing that you get with having these types of conditions in there is that you can delineate a set of different types of denials of that realist kind of conjunction of all of those things. So the non-cognitivist or the expressivist, somebody like that, would be denying the first of those the first of those conditions. So it's a person who says that this type of discourse isn't supposed to be taken as truth apt. Right? So when you say something like murder is wrong, that doesn't express a proposition which is true or false. It doesn't express a proposition at all. Right? It's they'd have to give an account themselves of what they mean when they say that. Then, like, what is it to say murder is wrong? And expressivist would say something like, saying murder is wrong is just the same as expressing your opinion about that. So it's like saying boo murder, right? It's not. It
I don't like murder. Right? It's like you're basically saying I don't like it. Or I do like it.
So if you're saying my view about murder is that I don't like it, then you've actually expressed a proposition which is true or false, right? But that's not to say that. So the expressivist is saying that it's not truth apt. So you can't replace it with a sentence that's truth apt, like you just did then. My view about murder is that it's wrong. That would be a different position, basically. It's kind of subjectivist or something.
Yeah.
Instead of reporting an objective fact, it's just reporting my internal states of affairs. But that could still be considered a realist in some sense, because at least he grants the first pillar of realism, that the sentence is at least true or false. So the expressivist is kind of just stamps all over this at stage one and says, look, these things aren't even true or false. So it's like going murder. Like, that's not true or false. And so his whole point is that it's not, we
It's like
deny that.
saying murder is orange. Like,
Can I ask it like from the layman point of view to summarize that real quick, Alex? So,
Mhm.
a moral realist would be somebody who would be able to assign literally a truth or false something to the proposition, and a more anti-realist would be more that's not even evaluatable. That's more of an opinion.
Well, yeah,
A
one type of
particular
anti-realist.
expressivist.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
So could you be a moral realist and still a subjectivist? Like all morality is subjective, but there are moral facts.
I mean, it depends
Boy,
how
this stuff
you
gets messy
classify
fast, doesn't it?
realism.
I mean,
I don't think
well,
you
yeah,
can.
there's two main theories that are considered to be subjectivist theories that fall into moral realism. One would be divine command theory. It's subjective. It makes universal prescriptions, but it's subjective that it's dependent on the mind of an agent. And then there's like other ones called like ideal observer theory, which would also be a subjective form of moral realism, which just means that it's contingent on the mind of a perfectly rational, whatever moral agent or so on and so forth. So it's possible for there to be subjective theories of moral realism.
Right. Okay. So
yes, but we experience it as objective. If some divine being has dictated, although it's subjective to that being, and for the rest of us, it's objective.
It's
universal.
Usually, they use that it's universal in its prescriptions.
Okay. Before this gets away from us, we talked about the kind of non-realist, I guess, who would quibble with the first claim. Now, what about the ones that are okay with the first claim but don't like the second claim? Are they also considered anti-realist?
They're called moral error theorists. So a moral error theorist is a cognitive form of anti-realism. So the moral error theorist says he takes the first thesis and accepts it, that moral statements do in fact express propositions. But then he goes, the second thesis is that all of which propositions are false.
Mm-hmm.
So he would be called a moral error theorist.
Right.
So he's a cognitivist, but he's a cognitivist who's also an anti-realist.
I think we need to define what a cognitivist is.
A cognitivist
I was hoping we wouldn't have to do that.
A cognitivist has already been explained. A cognitivist is someone that thinks that moral statements express propositions.
No, it's more than that. It's more than that. It's not only that they have a means. Not only them. Well, sorry, it's not. Is it not a case that they believe moral facts they're moral realists in the sense they believe there are moral objective facts? But
not
also,
all cognitivists are moral realists. Like I just said, there are certain type of cognitivists, namely moral error theorists, who are anti-realists. The only thing is that it's just saying that when you say that someone is a cognitivist in terms of ethics or morality, they're just taking the first thesis that moral statements do in fact express propositions. Now, if you go on to say that some of those propositions are true, you could be thought to be like a realist. But if you say that all of which statements are false, then you would be like a moral error theorist.
Right. But
so,
okay.
I'm actually taking a slightly. I'm looking at Mackey's argument for the moral error theory while you were talking, and that on the surface seems close to where I'm at, although I never knew that was what it was called. So perhaps I'm an anti-realist cognitivist.
There's also quasi-realism, and this is
shut up.
This is a very niche view, but it is quasi-realists hold that moral propositions only are emotional expressions, and they can be treated as if they were a truth act, and we have reason to treat them as they were a truth act. So that's a position put forward by Simon Blackburn. Just throwing that one out there too.
Yeah, that's tempting.
We all hate you, Max.
Yeah, kind of figured.
So I'm interested in this preferences idea that you were talking about earlier, JD, because in one way it does kind of seem like these are just preferences, and maybe they're just really extreme preferences. But there are a lot of arguments for why that really can't be what it is. I don't know what they are exactly.
I'm trying to think of it. Again, it's like the phrasing of it, because it can get kind of technical when you talk about morality, or everyone gets lost immediately. We all have reasons for why we want to do what we want to do. They can go down to biology, or if there's a God, it could be what God programmed you to want, or give you free will to want. But that in turn says, you have a preference to do something or not to do something. There are values and reasons involved, and they will inevitably differ from other people's values and reasons. there's some things that almost everyone shares. I mean, we tend to leave psychopaths out for obvious reasons. You could probably say that everyone does not want to suffer eternally. You can come up with some extreme, but the fact that it's a shared preference mean that you can then come with some kind of objective an objective moral fact can be derived from it, and I don't think so. So I think it's better to think of it in terms of preferences rather than dealing with facts.
Well, I don't
see
like
why...
to think of them in terms of wants, because it seems like in many occasions what people want are often in conflict with what they think they ought to do, right? So I think that would show that it can't be reducible to just a want, right? Like if you wanted to like steal some food because you were hungry, but you thought that it ought not be done because it was immoral, and it would seem to show that not everything we want is identical with what we consider to be moral. So I think that would be a problem.
Also,
that's actually more
also
like
we have the
I would say there's more of a conflict.
I just want to add to that. Also,
well, I was gonna. All right, well,
TJ's gonna go. TJ, did you want to say something?
I was going to say that I think in Seamus's case, it's a conflict between two preferences. You prefer not to, say, harm a business versus you also don't want to be hungry. So you balance the two preferences, and which one is stronger is the one you go with.
Actually, well, that's also a problem because you could go the opposite way. Sometimes we do something we really want, even though our psychology is saying, no, you shouldn't do this. Stop it. It shouldn't be like this is something where we know better, but still go against our better judgment anyway. So we have the exact opposite problem as well. I think it's a little more than two preferences just trying to work themselves out. Usually when we have two preferences,
that would just be question begging.
I don't think so. When we have two preferences, don't we usually just...
Well, we have to hammer out exactly what you mean by it's begging the question. At what point, yeah, I'd like to hear more. What do you mean that he's begging the question? Can you demonstrate that?
If you say that someone does something when they should know better, you're presupposing that there's an action that's morally right when you're saying that they should know better.
Well, they think they should know better. Or, I mean, we can imagine someone saying, you know better than this to themselves.
Well, even whether you say it's they think it or we think it, if it's them, they're presupposing moral realism.
All right.
So that wouldn't be, what you just said wouldn't be a refutation of the conflicting preferences view that JD was advancing.
All right. What about fair enough, but what about situation?
Because you're presupposing there's a fact of the matter as to which preference should win out.
All right.
Alex.
So TJ just said, I don't think... Yeah, okay, fair enough. We should probably move on then. And CK, for the record, yeah, I think you're right on that one.
Alex, you wanted to ask JD about something.
Okay, so on that view that you just outlined then, that identifies morality with preferences in some way, I kind of feel like it's something like it's works quite well in the first person, like when you're talking about your own situation where you're saying something like, I have like a feeling or something that I ought to do this, and I can cash that out in terms of my preferences and blah blah blah. And like you said, it can, in some sense, handle what Seamus was saying about there being a difference between what you want and what you ought. You say, well, I can just pass that out in terms of, we're having to reconcile different wants at the same time. Okay, fair enough. It seems to me that then whilst it handles that first-person case quite well, doesn't it suffer from some problem when you're looking in the third-person case, where like if you've got somebody doing something immoral, I'm trying to think of a case where, let's just say that there's somebody torturing a cat, because that's always the example in these cases. You get someone torturing a cat, and you say that what he's doing is wrong, but it's his preference to do that. And what do you mean by it being wrong? Do you just mean if I was him, I wouldn't do it? If I was him, my preference would be different. Is that
I think it come down to the language choice. I'd say, I don't like that you're doing that.
Your preference is that he wouldn't do it.
I would have a hard time coming up with an objective reason that didn't have to do with my own values conflicting with his.
I'm not asking you about the reason. What I'm asking you about is, it seems to me that you're putting forward a kind of semantic idea that the meaning of the this is bad or this is good is to be understood in terms of preferences.
JD, would it? Sorry, I was going to offer maybe a possibility.
Actually, Alex is pretty close, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to suggest that maybe you'd be expressing a level of distaste for what you're observing. So, in saying that you think that something is wrong, you're expressing a severe distaste for something, much in the same way you might have a distaste for...
Well, yeah, I mean, there are all kinds of reasons why I wouldn't want to torture a cat or to have someone else torture a cat. All kinds of positive emotions come out when cats are treated well, and all kinds of negative ones flow out when they're treated when someone's torturing them. So,
but I don't think Alex was asking.
There's some emotional reasons for that, and then I can go back to in general my general moral framework that I use. That I want everyone to kind of get along. It's my own personal preference, but I think that's my starting point.
Yeah. But so that is to address a different thing, which is like, why do you have these preferences or something? Which I'm not asking you about. It doesn't matter to me which preferences you have. It's that your meta-ethical idea. It's not your ethics that we're thinking about. It's your meta-ethics. So like, what is what is ethics in general or something, rather than what's your particular ethics. Right? And it seemed to me that you were putting forward this meta-ethical idea that moral sentences should be understood in terms of, instead of referring to moral values, because you don't like that, it sounds weird. So instead of referring to these things that maybe we don't know what they are, they're not physical, something like that, that's why you don't like them. So then you're more comfortable talking about preferences, because they're the types of internal mental states that you're familiar with. You have them every day. So you say, well, I'm happier to refer to preferences. So I'm going to, whenever someone says something about moral values, I translate that into talking about preferences. That seemed to me your idea. So it's a kind of semantic idea. You're saying the meaning of values is really, talk of values is really talk of preferences.
That last sentence is exactly what I'm getting at, yes.
Right, so my question is like in the detail of how this gets actually brought out in a specific case. I said to you, I can see that in those first person cases, how you have a fairly decent stab at the translation scheme. So when you say something like, if I'm first person, if I'm in a situation and I'm considering whether for me doing this action is right or wrong, I just turn that into, what do I want to do it or not? And then, like I said, you have different wants. So it's a complex landscape. It's not just I always know what I want and it's always black or white or whatever. Okay, sure. But what about when you're looking at a third person? What does it mean when you say about a third person who's torturing a cat that what he's doing is wrong? Because it seems to be that it is wrong if what he's doing.
Universal principles, surely. He wants everyone else to have the same universal principles that he does.
But we're talking about morality being cashed out in terms of preferences. And is the idea here to be that JD's preference is that he doesn't do it? That's what it means to say that it's wrong? Or is it supposed to be that it's wrong only if that guy's preference is for him not to do it?
Well, let me try and cash it out.
No, use... Well, I think JD's saying that he's got an idea of universal preferences that everybody should have, and therefore it doesn't matter whether it's him or someone else, they should have the same preferences, because he believes that's the way of everyone. That's to his advantage of getting along.
That's not addressing the question that Alex is asking.
That also seemed to not be what JD was saying as well. And he said maybe sometimes.
I'm actually okay with people talking for me, because, like I said, my own ideas of morality have been in flux for a while now. So honestly, this kind of conversations like this will help me try and flesh out how I really feel about the subject and how to explain it. I guess I would say if I see someone torturing a cat, in order for me to determine that what they're doing was, say, right or wrong, I have to know what values they have. If they value the torture, the suffering of a cat over all other things, then what they're doing would be right. But not to me. I have different values, and I would want to impose my values, because my values are more important to me than his. I would want to impose my values on him.
But if his preference is to torture the cat, doesn't that mean that ultimately you have to say that it's right according to your translation scheme, which is not wrong anyway, somehow? I mean, you're not torturing the cat. So if you were torturing the cat, you'd say, oh, this is wrong because I have a preference not to torture the cat. With this other guy
I-
over here,
I have a
he
hard
does
time-
like torturing cats. So
Yeah, it's where I have trouble even using the term right or wrong. I don't know if those categories make any sense.
Well, think about
but
it in
I
terms of
think-
like ice
are
cream.
you-
If you
Are you
I think what-
uncomfortable? Hold on. Are you uncomfortable? Because I think that this is the key for me why I'm not going with preferences. I'm uncomfortable saying, well, it's not wrong because that's his preference. That to me means that there's something not right with cashing it out as a mere matter of preferences. It's stronger than that. It's more than that.
right, it's like saying that if you
Well,
were to look at
I don't
someone.
think it's
Go ahead.
necessarily a problem with cashing it out as preferences. I think that there's two possible. I mean, well, there could be more, but there's at least two possibilities. One is that when you see someone else torturing a cat, your view is that you have a preference that conflicts with that action, and so if it was you, you would not do it. But given he has the alternative preference, you're happy for him to continue doing it.
No,
The other
that would not be it. I would like I said,
Let's hear
the
the
other-
other alternative because maybe your answer is coming up.
Then the other alternative is that your preference conflicts with what that person is doing, and I don't know if you would want to consider it a separate preference or bundle up as the same preference, but furthermore, you would prefer that they also not do it. So you're expressing some kind of disapproval for their action, and not merely that you would choose to not do it if you were in a situation that you were able to.
I don't really understand your point, CK. Surely JD has a preference for an objective action.
JD does have a preference. If you're boiling it down to somebody else's preferences, would you say that it's okay for Roger to do it because that's just what Roger prefers?
But he's having a preference about the action, not who's doing it.
Yes.
Well, that's not necessarily the case. So, for example, if I'm someone that dislikes broccoli, right, I wouldn't necessarily disapprove of somebody else eating broccoli. Even though
you're
I
allowed to have
might
two.
find
Okay,
it
well, you're allowed to have
disgusting.
your preferences are allowed to have different application. I suppose is what I'm saying. Some of JD's preferences would have universal application, and others wouldn't.
Well, I don't think it's appropriate to use the word universal. But the distinction that I'm drawing, nevertheless, is that there are going to be certain preferences that we have for ourselves, but do not express any kind of disapproval if other people act in a way that conflicts with them.
Yes, and there's some others that
and
are.
then there's going to be others that are. So what I understood Alex to be asking of JD is which of the two categories does JD's preferences fall into in this kind of situation? Did I understand your question correctly, Alex?
yeah, I think that's broadly right, and I think that it's awkward on each of those for slightly different reasons. And JD immediately skirted away from saying that it's okay. It's just if he likes doing it, then it's okay. Like that's not what he wants to say. But then it seems to me that if you go the other view, then morality just turns into what JD's preferences are.
Yes.
And then it handles those cases okay, but then it's like, well, why would it be, now it's an utterly first person and it's just singled on JD. So what I'm supposed to do, whether what I do now, whether I fill this up again and have another glass, is entirely dependent on whether JD prefers that I do or not, which seems to be unfortunate.
I don't think. But I don't think. But I think. But I think JD.
Jump in here quickly. That goes back to the three preferences I said about who decides whether something's good or bad. It was whether you're personally, society, or some sort of biological-driven idea of what's moral. And you've got those three choices, none of which actually seem to be terribly satisfactory. So none of them have any sort of objective moral authority.
Well, I don't think. Well, but I think that the position that JD is describing is an anti-realist position, Alex. And so he would concede that he's not, in virtue of him having these preferences, it's not normative for another agent.
Okay, so then the translation admits from the outset that it doesn't do a very faithful job of translating our normal talk about morality, where we would say that those values are binding across, universally binding or something. So that it's commonly used when you say that something is wrong, is that it's not just wrong for me, but it's okay for you or something. Like the common usage implies or has tethered to it the idea of them applying universally, right? So you can have an anti-realist translation scheme if you like, and you might tout the ontological benefits of doing so because we don't have these weird properties in it. But one of the concessions that you've got to give up is that it doesn't really track how we talk about morality, because, you know, yes, actually, when we say stuff's right or wrong, it doesn't really extend. It doesn't really have any force to bind anybody else's actions. It's just
let's suppose we lived in a society with torturing cats. And it would be immoral not to torture cats. It would therefore still be. It would be immoral not to torture a cat if we had a society in which it was an obligation, and your sort of own personal morality was sort of subdued, as we found in things like Islamic State. Your own personal morality is suppressed in an authoritarian state, and that the society then defines what's right or wrong, and you don't. And torturing cats could easily be right.
Well, if I can respond to Alex's point real quick.
Okay, and then I want to hear why CK disagrees.
Yeah.
Okay. I think the semantic issue is that I think a lot of our moral talk, in a sense, has moral realism built into it. So it's hard to speak in anti-realist terms when most of the language of morality has to do with realism. So that's why I to try and distinguish between people who think, you know, moral values, there's an objective, or there's something outside, there's something permanent that we all should do, versus where I'd have to look at the person torturing it. What is his, you know, as far as from his perspective versus mine.
Yeah, but that's more. But
hold on, let me run through it real quick. If he values, like I said, torturing things for fun, then he's doing what he ought to do. His value, you know, the value is, you know, he has the ought follows from it. It follows from his value. It conflicts with mine, and I might try to convince him that he should change, like his value should change for some reason. I could try and convince him of that. But if he doesn't agree, well, in the end, I'm probably going to try and enforce my own view on him. My own. Well, I can't say that, you know, everyone should have it. It's luckily that my values happen to be, you know, I want everyone to be kind of generally happy, healthy, and wise, and to continue the species. So that's lucky that my values, would most people would agree with them. But they don't have to, and it's not. And if they disagree, it's not going to stop me from imposing my will if I deem it worthwhile, if my preference is strong enough.
So Max, hold on to what you want to say before we lose it.
Hopefully that answers the
explain why you
question.
disagree with Alex, if you can still remember.
Yeah, no, it was only one thing actually, although I think it's probably an important thing. I'm not sure I agree that it doesn't track with the way that we have moral discourse on a day-to-day basis. And the reason is that I'm sure it's the case for all of us, and I know it's the case for me, that I've had conversations where somebody will ask, for example, do you think this is wrong? And it's not clear to me that when someone says, I think that this is wrong, or I regard X as wrong, they're making a universal declarative statement in those instances.
But
in
then
fact, I've sorry.
The
final thing I was going to say is
I think that, then obviously it's not a universal statement anymore. Right? Obviously that's the case, isn't it? I think that 2 + 2 = 5 is not a necessary truth. It's me just reporting what I think. Once you embed a proposition in an intentional context like that, then it changes. You should be thinking about what the semantics of the sentence on its own, not embedded in one of those contexts.
Sure, but I think that on JD's view, we could consider statements like X is wrong to mean, you know, I regard X as wrong.
Yeah,
which
yeah.
in turn means something.
Sorry.
I think an easy way to say when someone is doing something wrong is if whether ought doesn't actually fit with their value. Like if someone does not, you know, values, you know, the well-being of kittens and yet is torturing one, he's doing something wrong. That doesn't fit with, you know, he's not getting where he wanted to be.
JD, so, can I just ask you a quick question, maybe to help clear up what you may try to be getting at, because I think maybe you're losing track of things with this semantics about preferences. From what I understand, you think that our moral talk comes out of us believing in moral realism. That's where it evolved out of us, kind of looking at certain actions and things and deeming, and us projecting some kind of rightness or wrongness onto it, where none really exists. Like, I think that's a little different from the whole preference talk. I think that's just error theory. Like it's one thing to boil it down to preferences. It's another thing to project a kind of wrongness or rightness onto the world. Just like how we might be eating ice cream. If we don't like vanilla ice cream, we'll attribute some kind of we might attribute some kind of inherent yuckiness to it. But that's just really our own projections onto the world.
Yeah, but I said there are two types. There's the stuff that you feel is universally right or wrong, and the stuff that you feel individuals have right to. But anyway, this gets back to the fact that society can easily. Who decides what's right? A murderer could have. JD could be an axe murderer, and actually he's not telling us he actually really likes to axe murder people, and that is something he'd like to have everybody else doing. So it's just one of those options about what's right or wrong, and we can't accept these, and because there's a mixture of things that could have potential candidates for deciding what's right or wrong, and there's no clear way of deciding what that is.
Well, I think you're just getting onto normative ethics about us trying to universalize stuff or determine things. It doesn't matter usually how we determine things. It's just how we're using the words. That's what's up for discussion here.
I would say it's a moral fact that the rumpus needs more coffee.
I'd say maybe less. We project our taste onto the world itself and make it universal. I have never seen pineapple I thought was delicious. I hate pineapple. If you showed me any pineapple from anywhere, I would think it would be disgusting. I'd project some kind of yuckiness to it. I don't think it's an inherent property of the pineapple, but universally speaking, it would apply to all pineapples.
Yeah, but what if society said that pineapples were wonderful and you had to eat them and like them?
Then who's
right or wrong?
I think you're kind of missing the tree for the forest here. I'm using these analogously. What I'm saying is, in the same way we might project some kind of yuckiness into the world, or in a similar way, we also project wrongness or rightness onto certain actions. Like, that's it.
Yeah. Yes, it's a subjective act, but who makes the yes? But so what?
I'm just trying to outline what I think JD's position is. JD, you're free to correct me here if you want.
I'm actually. I think we've kind of hammered that a bit. Let's. Alex had another objection to my position. I'd really like to hear it.
I'd like to hear it.
I think that then one more angle that you can go to probably tease out where you think about this, and I think a friendly reconstruction possibly. So the objections, not an objection, but so it seems to me that the one consequence of cashing things out in terms of preferences is that you mischaracterize moral disagreement as a result. So take a case where two people are looking at a painting and one of them says that painting's beautiful and the other one says no, that painting's really ugly or something, right? It's natural enough anyway. Not everyone agrees with this, of course, but it's natural enough to think that they're not really disagreeing with one another because one of them's saying I find it beautiful and the other one's saying I find it ugly, right? And they're not disagreeing. They would be disagreeing if one of them said it is beautiful and the other one said no, it isn't. But they're just simply reporting how they feel, so there's no disagreement there. They're not saying that there's one objective fact and the other one saying the negation of that. So that's not a case of disagreement. And then on the other end of the scale, you've got something like two physicists and one of them says that's a neutrino and the other one says no, it's not, you idiot, it's a photon or something, right? Where there is fundamental disagreement. You can't read what they're saying there as I feel like it's a neutrino and the other one says no, I feel like it's a photon. That's not a good account of what they mean. And then you've got the case of moral disagreement, which is admittedly much more difficult to categorize in this kind of landscape. But consequence of cashing it out in terms of preferences is that it pushes it way over the side towards the art case and firmly away from the side of a disagreement. So you can't really say when two people say, so one guy sees torturing a cat and says, oh, that's wrong. And then JD looks over his shoulder and says, no, it isn't. Right? That's not a case of moral disagreement. There can't be a case of moral disagreement really because all they're saying is my preference is that cats get tortured and the other guy's saying, well, my preference is that cats don't get tortured. So in a sense, it seems to me that consequence of this means that there can't be moral disagreement.
That's what I was going to say.
I would wrong.
If I were to be consistent, right? If I were trying to be consistent, I would look over shoulder and say, well, what you just said is equivalent to saying what that guy's doing is orange. What he's doing is neither right nor wrong. It's simply what he's doing.
No, you'd have to say that Because you're changing theory then, in that case. I mean, you're not saying...
I might be. Like I said, I'm very messy with morality. I'm still trying to find my way.
At least for the proposal that said moral talk is to be cashed out in terms of preferences, and not now you're saying moral talk is gibberish, doesn't mean anything at all. Like the sentence you just gave a minute ago is kind of grammatically meaningless or something like that. That's a different position. That would be a type of error theory as well. It would be a non-cognitivism, right? It's just they're not even supposed to be considered true or false. But you're saying they are supposed to be considered true or false once you translate them into talk about preferences, because it's true that you don't like torturing cats, right? Presumably. So when you say torturing cats is wrong, that's true because it's true that you don't like torturing cats. So you don't have the theory, the non-cognitivist. You're not a non-cognitivist. You think that these statements are true or false, or at least the position that you outlined. If you feel free to abandon it, you don't.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm obviously gonna have to pick a hole because I've definitely contradicted myself there. So.
No, I mean, I just
we're
think
holding you to that position for the rest of your life.
Yeah, next G-Man hangout, G-Man will watch like the first we'll just someone will give him a link to this 1 minute segment and go ha, and I'm gonna hear it for like next 5 years.
So
he doesn't even know what morality means to himself.
I think I have a reconstruction which might be more maybe it's more what you think, and I'm not sure that the semantic thesis is really one that you are that keen on, it seems to me, when pointing out these flaws in them. I think something that Max said a minute ago is probably right, seems to me anyway, or at least this position, let's see how you feel about it. Something like, the reason that we have dispositions to say phrases like this is right or this is wrong is because we have preferences for cats not being tortured and stuff. It's the reason why we say them. It's not to be considered the meaning of those statements, but it is to be considered something like the explanation for why I'm saying it. I have a preference, and that motivates me to say those words, right? Because of one reason or another, right? Maybe evolutionarily, maybe culturally, something like that. But I'm motivated by my preferences, and that means that you say these things. And then maybe you could hold a position where they're literally meaningless. Now, you can be a non-cognitivist, but you could fit in this idea about preferences, not as a semantic idea, but as a kind of motivation.
Well, I think it would be true that my preferences, I would not consider my preferences right or wrong. They're simply my preferences. Does that change anything with, if I were to categorize it, would that change anything, how I think about that?
That you're not saying that your preferences are right or wrong.
Yeah, they simply are my preferences.
But I think there's a problem with appealing to preferences as an explanation, because I'm not sure that appealing to preferences isn't simply vacuous, right? Because basically it seems like all you're saying is that given a choice between A and B, I do A, right? That's all that it means to say I have a preference for A, right? So that doesn't really explain why I do A, right? Now, I guess if you were to understand preferences to be desires, you could probably get around that problem.
I'm actually kind of using those more or less synonymously.
Yeah.
I have certain values, like I value the well-being of a kitten, which is another way to say that I prefer kittens not to be stabbed. So if I see one doing that, we'll cut that out. Whatever he might have for based on his values, good reasons for doing it. But I don't care. I don't like seeing kittens stabbed unless he provides me some reason that would override that. In this situation, it is okay because X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. Well, I think.
Anyway, Alex, did that?
Yeah, I think talk of.
One second before we get on, Jack. Alex, is there any more we should probably hammer out on that, or we kind of get it across?
I don't know. Not off the top of my head, no.
Just, like I said, I think sometimes the language of anti-realism just makes it hard. Wait, where were we again? God damn it.
Well, I think,
I'd like to bring up this whole issue of motivation and belief and desire.
Oh no.
No. Why?
Why? Just think it's a complicated can of worms.
Well, let's get complicated.
It seems to me to be really important. It seems to me to be maybe what's at the crux of it, really.
Yeah, I think a lot of moral theories say that morality needs to necessarily motivate, but there are instances in which we don't act on our motivations, and they need to give accounting for why that's the case. Because if you said that something, it seems like if you were saying that something is moral, but you're not motivated to do it, then you're just paying lip service to it. You're not. It doesn't really seem to be what we mean when we say something is right or wrong. It seems like it carries some type of motivation that you shouldn't do it. And like I think these could be contrasted with like epistemic motivations, like like rationality. Like if I have good reasons for X, and then it motivates you, right, to either believe in X or whatever. It has some type of reason behind it. So I think it's pretty essential to moral speech.
I'm just wondering if maybe it's trying to get a better handle on it might help me decide where I stand. I'm sort of feeling very much like JD, right? I don't know where I stand, and
JD is a cast iron moral nihilist.
I mean, Shamos was saying that you wouldn't go against your morals, but I think you can, because you can say that I've got a universal set of morals that everybody should comply with. But I could, there's that big I'm in a shop and there's that nice sweetie I can see ahead of me, and I want to just nick that. I don't have any money on me, and I want that. And you know what you're doing is failing your own universal rules, but you decided, oh, I'm going to make a special exception for myself and nick that sweetie and run off with it or whatever. And you know you've done something wrong, but you know you enjoyed it. You had that tension between those two desires, one to follow your own moral thing, but you could see a personal advantage in nicking that sweet or something.
Well, I don't hold that view. That's a mischaracterization of my view. I don't think that when you believe something is moral that you always do the moral thing. I think there are things that come in conflict with that. So no, I don't think that we could just look at what people think is morality in terms of their actions. I
thought you were saying that. Sorry, I understood that to be what you were saying.
No.
Okay.
But when you say the anti-realist, you have to sort of figure out which anti-realist theory you're holding to, right? Because you could, I mean, are you saying that JD is a...
Who's squeaking?
Jack, it sounds like you're squeaking.
I'm squeaking?
Someone's echoing or
There's a
squeaking or
beeping sound.
something.
It actually was coming from
I was
him.
muted, so it wasn't me, but can you...
I think it's Jack.
Yeah, that sounds like
Yeah, I think it's Jack, yes.
If everyone mutes while
Change
Jack
the
is talking,
Jack.
fire alarm.
everyone should mute while Jack is talking so we can accommodate the fact that he's on his mic.
Yeah, so I mean, what I'm trying to understand is whether JD is actually taking a non-cognitivist or a cognitivist view about those kinds of propositions.
I would say I'm not even sure. I'm just trying to shore up, like, it's not so, I kind of know what my position is, but trying to express it is difficult because of all the different terms used in different positions. So I'm having trouble fitting myself into the box to the point where, as Alex pointed out, I've even contradicted myself at least once. So hopefully these talks will help me connect.
I mean, as I understood, I mean, I've got this A.C. Grayling book next to me, and he defines stop it, Jack, or someone. A cognitive view is something that you can. So there might be moral facts, but the fact you can then understand those facts makes you a cognitivist, rather than the definition being offered. Okay, stop sawing away at whatever it is you're sawing away at, Jack. You're squeaking at me.
You can build your Lego Star Wars later.
Yes.
Jack, it sounds like you're getting feedback somehow.
No, it sounds like a parakeet dying in the winter.
You're torturing a parakeet, yes. Stop it now.
You realize I don't prefer the torturing of parakeets. Yes. Cut out.
Jack, just hide yourself in the bathroom. That usually helps.
Oh. God.
Especially when there's an earthquake.
Well, he lives in Manhattan, right? So he and I are in the same neighborhood. So if he goes to the bathroom, they're built like fucking nuclear fallout shelters.
Well, let's go back to cognitivism and non-cognitivism. I thought one way I like to think of cognitivism is the idea that moral judgments express beliefs. And non-cognitivism is saying No, that's completely wrong. It's not even beliefs. When we talk about morality, maybe we think we're talking about our beliefs, but it's not. That's just sort of a misunderstanding of what's really going on.
Well, I think cognitivism is concerning itself with whether or not the propositions can be assigned a truth value, if they can be considered true or false.
Well, it feels like an anti-realist, non-cognitivist is saying there is no morality. Morality is a bunch of nonsense. People just do what they do. That's how people express it's what it feels like. I'm not sure if I'm...
We said earlier, it just means that whether moral statements are in fact propositional, right? And that just means whether or not the statement can be true or false, whether it's truth apt. So
right, yeah, which is sort of similar, compatible with the AC grain, which basically you can determine whether you believe you can work out whether something is true or false. I suppose that's compatible with the AC Grayling definition I've got here.
Yeah,
and then of course and then you've got to decide, which you were saying, if you say there's something, and then you've got to go and then decide, does that reflect a realism? So the back to the case I was describing at the very start, which is if you say that murder is wrong is true, if you can justify that, does that then entail that there is a moral fact that's true? And I thought if you could say that if you could determine that was true, therefore that entailed a moral fact. But some people, I think, do dispute
not
that.
In a robust. Some people think that, like some people like moral relativists or moral subjectivists so they're cognitivists and they think that they're truth apt, but they think that they're not. Like if you mean by fact some external fact of the matter, then no, because like a moral relativist says what makes these propositions true is some internal states or whatever of the agent themselves. It's not a fact in an external sense.
Right.
I'm still looking through Mackey's error theory. Just trying to figure out what the hell I'm even on about.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I think about that error theory. It seems silly to me.
Well, it's weird. I mean, I'll hear like I said, I hear one thing. I'm like, that sounds good. That one sounds good too. Wait, they contradict each other. Shit, I gotta pick one. I don't want to pick one. I want them both.
So, I think it's
quasi-realism. Try that.
None of it works.
Quasi-realism, maybe. And they're like, wait, no, I'm sorry, that's a bunch of crap too. No, every moral framework I've ever heard has some pretty glaring problems with it.
Yes, that's right, and that's true in almost every philosophy that you want to, any philosophical position that you want to take. You shouldn't be thinking, well, which is the one with no problems, right? That's not even the right way to think.
Not even the least number of problems. It's just everyone seems to have these huge holes you can run through them.
It seems to me that saying, well, which is the one that coheres with the rest of my worldview or something is also a pretty strange way of approaching this type of thing too. I mean,
why is that a strange way of approaching it?
Not if you're with my world.
Hold on, why? Let's find out why.
Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
One of the things that seems strange about that to me is that it assumes that you have a view on every single question, which I mean, that's certainly not the way that I think about things. So I don't have a view about metaethics. I have no idea what the right position is, right? I can, and I think maybe this just, the more philosophy you do, the more of it you realize you're completely unsure about, apart from the bit that you spent ages specializing in. Like I have a particular view in a particular area of metaphysics of modality. That's almost the only thing I have a settled view on in philosophy, right? And I think a mature way of looking at these things is to have a good idea of the strengths and limitations of every prospective view. And the actual debates between philosophers are not, you rarely get debates between philosophers where they say one of them's an anti-realist and one of them's a realist, and they're like going head to head on every point about it. There'll be two anti-realists picking apart one potential consequence of a view to see how deep that really goes. That's the view. It's thinking about all of these things. So really, I was trying to point out to JD earlier that there are some desirable features of the view, for instance, the ontological reduction or something that comes with not believing in these kind of queer facts, that moral facts, like what type of facts are they? They're inherently kind of strange. You can't touch them, you can't measure them, blah, blah, blah. So we don't want to have them in our ontology if we can help it. They're like two types of thing or something. We don't want them. But then there are costs that come with that type of reduction. Like it doesn't necessarily track very well how we speak about things. You have to give up the fact that you can normally say, so for instance, I was talking about moral disagreement, and it seems to me that's a consequence of that view. that you have to say that nobody can disagree about morality. It's never a genuine case of disagreement. Well, that's in the minus side. So we're like a weighing scales trying to.
I would say that seems like a
overall
pragmatic
value.
minus. Like it's more of an annoyance. Like, oh crap, I have to use a different language rather than necessarily a problem with the position. More like just a pragmatic issue of trying to talk about it.
So one's like a metaphysical concern, the other one's like a semantic or linguistic concern as well. But then there might also be the fact that if it was a consequence of the view, for instance, well, I mean, we were trying to push this on you earlier. This kind of dilemma is that, like, if it's in the third person case, is the answer to what it means to say that it's wrong for Jim to torture a cat? Does it mean Jim's preference is not to torture the cat? Because you're going to say no, because if he doesn't have that preference, then you can't say that it's wrong, and you want to say that it's wrong. So then the other option seems to be that you have to say my preference is that he shouldn't do that. And then the consequence of that becomes that the whole of it, like all of ethics, revolves around what you think, and that's.
I like harder facts. I like to latch on to a fact. The fact I don't like it is a fact. I can easily start there. Like, I don't like it. Sure. You do like it. Is there any way we're going to deal with this agreement? It is a fact that I prefer my values to his. That's the only way I can really get started. Because once I start, everything else just seems to fall apart when I try to ground it.
I don't see why we're having a problem here with JD having some facts, that some sorts of behaviour that he wishes to apply universally, and others he's happy to have other people have their subjective opinions about what they should do. There are some set of things he universally does not want to be done, full stop. And that's his preference, but then society might have a preference. And of course, this whole good and bad, it seems to me, just a function of the brain, human brain, and a combination of social factors, our brain, neurology, and evolution. And it's just a mess. And so trying to find some sort of objectiveness about it is a flawed enterprise.
But you're bringing too many things in at the same time. So just focus on the
lots of coffee.
JD was.
Only now we're bringing up this issue.
Talking about.
Sorry, I missed that, Alex. Hannah
so the precise position that we were talking about was JD's proposition was that when you understand when somebody says a sentence like torturing a cat is wrong, right? The meaning of that sentence is to be cashed out in terms of preferences. So what does it mean to say that? It means some other sentence that doesn't use the word wrong, but does use the word preference, as in, I have a preference that people don't torture cats. That could be a candidate for it.
Yes.
Or another one would be the guy doing it has a preference that he shouldn't torture a cat. Right? And then I was just outlining that those seem to be the two options on the table. For what, it's all good to say we're cashing out in terms of preferences. How do we cash it out in terms of preferences? That's what I'm getting.
Yeah, well, let me
saying
get back.
Here's two options, and they're both pretty bad.
Yeah.
Right?
I want to jump back to the semantic thing for a minute, because I think it's where it comes down, like, what do we even mean when we say something is or isn't moral? And so I think the reason I use preferences, because when I want to say that is right or that is wrong, I don't know if I can cash it out.
Exactly.
Like, I don't think that right and wrong versus preference or not a preference would work synonymously. That I think we're talking about totally different things. And so since I don't feel like I can cash out right or wrong, I'm only comfortable saying I don't like that, I do like that, here's why, but that doesn't mean I'm necessarily it really means much except for just that. I do like that, I don't like this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this. So maybe I might be leaning more towards non-cognitivism than initially it seemed.
But now it just seems like you're just saying, I don't know what to say about morality, but I do know that I can say which things I like and which things I don't like, which is,
yes,
that's okay, but now you're just retreating from the philosophical question about what does, this metaethical question. You've now no longer presented a view, you've just said, I don't know about that question, right? That putting preferences forwards as a proposal for the answer to that question is one thing, and now you're just saying, I want to keep my preferences and I don't know what to say about morality, which is okay, fine, fair enough.
Yeah, I mean,
I've been fighting you out of this because, like,
get your shit.
Obviously, I'm willing to try. I still want. Honestly, what I want is moral realism. I just can't seem to get there when I try and reason to it.
That's exactly how I feel.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think what
it's like, I mean, let me
have.
Let me tell a quick before you I want to tell just a quick little brief story. What I think both Helen and I have both had long conversations with Ozzy on this. Ozzy, I think he actually is more comfortable with moral talk than you are, Alex. I think is more. That's like more his focus is morality. And while I tend to drink the Ozzy Kool-Aid most things, and this is one of the few cases, I can't quite get my teeth into it. He's explained it and explained it and explained it.
Dilemma, right?
There's some certain part I can't quite put my foot on it, but there's one certain part where it just falls apart. I'm like, no, I can't go there, and that's the place we have to go to get moral realism.
Yes.
Ozzy's view is incomprehensible.
No.
I wouldn't go that far.
I wouldn't go that far either.
Get on board with a certain part of it.
I just don't. I've never been able to understand what the hell he's talking about. It just seems like a mess.
What is he drawing from, at least, Jack? I mean, it's moral realism, but where, like, what? I guess.
I can't tell whether his view is a naturalist view, based on some kind of notion of the good that's derived from.
Jack, oh my God.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, here's what sucks. I really actually want to hear what Jack says, because Jack, I believe you're more in the non-cognitivist, anti-realist position. Unfortunately, your audio quality is really hurting it.
Jack is.
I can imagine Jack is not a non-cognitivist.
Jack is a
Jack,
realist.
you need a microphone. I can just come to you in like 15 minutes and give you mine.
Jack
is a moral nihilist guy. Jack is a moral nihilist guy.
Okay.
No, Jack is.
I
That's
don't
not
know
true.
about that. I don't think.
No, Jack.
No, I said it.
Well,
He's a
from the
moral
responses.
realist.
Okay, I think from the response, I'm saying I don't think any of us knows what Jack. We'll have to wait for Jack's audio to get fixed, and we'll find out.
No, that's not correct. Jack is a relativist. He thinks that there are value properties that exist in the world, but there isn't a correct way to perceive the value properties. That's Jack's view.
I can't believe he thinks there are value properties in the world.
He doesn't think there's a correct way to perceive. So.
Well, that's why when you said I want to get into like intentional states, I said, oh no, because I used to be firmly in the nihilist camp and very comfortable, and this new position has muddied things a lot.
Yeah, it really does.
I'd like to pose a question. If society said that you were obliged to kill cats whenever you met one, and that was the right thing to do, does that become right?
No. It's an institutional.
Yeah, but I mean,
legality and laws are distinct from what people mean when they say.
Yeah, but
there might be
not necessarily what's
legally,
legal,
but right, but morally right, because that's how we basically work.
Well,
if people have individual moral positions and society conflicts with them, we go with the societies.
It would be easy to construct a way where you could imagine a society where that turns out to be right.
Yeah.
Like, burning witches. It's easy to construct a society where burning witches seems right. Like, witches are real things, and if you burn them, you purify them. So it's a little bit of pain for a really good afterlife. Whereas if you let them live as witches and you don't burn them, then you're doing them a real disservice because their afterlife is going to suck from then on. And if everybody believed that, that would be supportive, right? I'm just curious if I could ask CK where they feel that way about kittens somehow.
Well, CK, I'm just kind of curious how Jack could be considered a relativist if he thinks that these things aren't just dependent on, what people think. They're dependent on value properties outside of people that evoke some type of normative action. That seems to kind of distinct
we should be asking
relativism.
Jack when he gets his audio working.
It does seem a bit strange to have a conversation about someone who is here, who can't talk about it.
It's only because of his audio problems that we're talking to CK. CK seems to know a bit about Jack's position, and Jack's audio is crap. So
it's because
they have to do this, but
it's because there isn't a correct way to perceive the value properties. That's why it's a relativist view.
If I can make a quick aside, Helena, we should do this again, but when we can maybe find a time when Shook is available. He's a philosopher who's apparently very heavily in the pragmatic camp. It'd be interesting to hear that viewpoint.
Yeah, I was leaning.
He's a moral realist who's very much into pragmatics.
I don't know if his well, I guess in the debate it's a different setting, but I recall his moral system that he proposed in his debate with Craig was kind of crazy, but sorry.
He gave me his view on pragmatics in person, and I was like, I'm not getting it, but it would be interesting to hear him with a little more time.
But Joe, don't you think all the realist positions are kind of crazy?
Yeah, well, I think all of them are. This is a depressing. So it all just like all I know is how to argue against like divine command theory and stuff. But when you ask me what my moral system is like I don't know. I don't.
If a
like,
divine command theorist happily said, "You're right, it's subjective," I'm going to go with what he says. It's when they keep insisting that it's absolute and objective that I feel like I have to keep jumping in, going, no, 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 no. That his preference is not objective just because it's his preference.
CK, it's echoing because you're not muted on the other hangout.
Would it?
Whatever you're doing to that kitten is not okay.
Yeah, it's bad.
With the so
It's
it's there's
CK
no.
is not muted on the other hangout. I'm telling you.
I've taken care of it.
So
We should be able to speak without any interruption now.
All right, Jack. The question on right now is, what is your moral position? Where do you fall in all this?
Well, CK described it correctly.
You did.
I think value properties are in the world, but there isn't a fact of the matter as to the correct way to perceive them.
How can you think value properties are in the world?
Didn't I give you the argument?
Well,
It's
yeah.
crazy.
No, it's because of. It seems like it's just because you give up too much if you don't just go ahead and assume it.
Assume.
I don't think we know the argument yet. What is
Yes,
the argument for value properties existing in the world?
Yes.
Well, I mean, it's not an easy argument to explain.
We like hard. That's kind of why we have Alex here. You can maybe kind of dumb it down for us if we need him to.
Well, if you, the hangout that I have where Jack explains some aspects of Bill Grommy eventually leads to at the tail end that, you know, as a consequence of this view, value properties must be in the world. So if everyone is interested, I'm plugging that. It's the video right before this one.
What's a value property exactly?
Jack?
The labor theory of value. Oh, wrong hangout. Sorry.
I mean, there are non-moral value properties. You know, I like chocolate ice cream.
Yeah, so I have the same view of chocolate as I do of moral properties. They work basically the same way.
Yeah, rape and chocolate are the same. That's the tagline.
Well, it sounds awful, but if it's the case, it's the case, right?
I do hate pineapples more than I hate rape, so.
So, Jack, how is that
that is
not
true
just
for me
the
too.
preference view that JD was outlining earlier then? How is that?
It's an anti-Humean view. So I think the properties are external to the mind and are perceived rather than projected.
Okay. Wow, you lost me there.
He thinks
Yeah, I'd have to know a
the
bit more about-
deliciousness is in the cake just as much as the chocolate is.
Yeah, there's a property of desirability.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay, sure. Yeah.
Over and above the physical properties that constitute the cake as a natural object.
Right.
So, Helena, you don't accept Bill Gramey's argument about the first and third person character of.
I don't know it well enough yet. I can, when I was going through that hangout with Jack and having him explaining, I could see a way to agree with it until he got to that last one, and that one is just so far out that it's hard for me to get myself in the right frame to
You see,
be
what
able to
you
say
what
that
you
I'm a
probably
person who would accept that there are moral properties and value properties out in the world. That one is just really rough for me.
what you probably
In the
don't
side
know
chat,
is
we should probably, if I want to, it looks like Alex has to go. So if we
Alex,
jump
thank
on
you
farewell.
so much.
Don't worry.
You've
See you
been
later.
so valuable.
You're a saint,
You'll be
Alex.
missed. It's we're gonna be adrift now. We're just gonna float around, but we're just gonna start yelling at each other like, you're wrong about it all.
They made a mistake in canonizing Mother Teresa. They should have canonized Alex.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Alex is merciful.
We'll need a bronze of Alex and Ozzy both going like, you know, side by side.
All right, I'm going to bed. See you later.
Thank you so much, Alex.
By the way,
Okay,
does
so
anyone
Jack,
like to know,
I want to hear more
anyone
about.
like to know Ozzy's moral view? I think I have it down fairly well.
oh god.
Okay, let's talk about Jack real quick first, if you don't mind.
That was Helena's nicer version of "Shut the fuck up, Max."
Well, since Ozzy isn't here, or maybe CK, you were about to say.
Oh, for God's sake, not a third person with the same avatar.
CK, you were about to explain to me
What's with
why
the
you think I'm having
same
a hard
avatar,
time.
guys? I don't.
What?
We've got
Have you
3
all
people with the
knocked-
same goddamn avatar.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, they've all got black belts and knocking Darwin's Day out of hangouts. That's where the black belt comes in.
Oh, do we have another black belt now?
I
Yeah,
wouldn't.
third black belt.
I wouldn't mind hearing the distinction between first person and third person concept, because that's in, like, is it something that's, since you're dealing with the mind, because I understand that in like substance dualism arguments, like arguments against that, and I don't know, I've seen that like view popping up and shit that I've been reading lately, so I would be interested to hear you guys elaborate on it.
It's just the idea that there's a distinction. We have a distinction between the first person and third person point of view on ourselves, which you can see in the difference between the phrase that the statement that I predict that I will go to the party versus the statement that I intend to go to the party.
Mm.
Right. So when I say I predict that I will go to the party.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm sort of looking at myself from a detached perspective as
it's a scientific.
Yeah, exactly. As an object subject to various causal forces, right?
Same prediction, like just that word clarified it a bunch. Thank you.
Yeah. Whereas when I say I intend to go to the party, I'm speaking from the first person perspective of agency.
Yeah.
So
okay.
It's the distinction between an agent and a patient, right? And so the basic idea there is that you can have the same duality of perspective with respect to objects in the world, right? I can look at an object purely as a third person, purely from a third person detached scientific naturalistic perspective, right? Where I just see it as a set of causal tendencies and dispositions, right? I can look at it basically in terms of the physical or natural facts that constitute it. But I can also look at it as an object which makes demands on me of one kind or another, right? So I can look at a hurricane and study it as a meteorological phenomenon, or I can look at it as a threat, right? And similarly, with a piece of cake, right, I can look at it as a natural object, talk about its physical properties, what elements or molecules that constitute it, in what combination, what its temperature and texture and volume and mass and so on are. Or I can look at it as being a desirable object, which prompts me to eat it. Right? Just like the hurricane prompts me to flee. So that's the basic idea. But if you look, Phil Gramy has a lecture called Values and Agency, which is on YouTube, where he lays out the basic argument for why he thinks we have to posit.
I think Seamus he linked to that.
Oh yeah, I think Philip actually watched it because of discussions he was having with Shane.
Philip, explain error theory to JD. We need to set JD straight in this hangout.
Well, I think we were trying to explain that before.
Oh, that's right. Go ahead.
The idea is just that there's a difference between seeing certain statements as not actually uttering propositions, right? Like if I say, pass me the salt, right? That's a command. So it's different from saying the salt is desirable, right? Or the salt is good. So you could think of thou shalt not kill as an example, right? I could say murder is wrong, right? But that's uttering a proposition, seemingly, right? At least formally, it seems to be uttering a proposition, right? But if I say "thou shalt not kill," then I'm issuing a command, right? So non-cognitivists want to say that it's a mistake to think that what people are really doing when they say murder is wrong is actually predicating some fact about murder, right? That they're actually making a statement, propositional claim, versus that in fact we should reanalyze those utterances in some kind of non-propositional way. Maybe they're actually disguised commands. Formally, they take the form of, they're in the indicative mood. They take the form of declarative statements formally, but in fact, what's really going on is that people are issuing disguised commands, right? That would be one approach. That's, I think, called prescriptivism, which is one form of non-cognitivism, right? Some other people will say that they're basically expressions of attitudes, so that when I say murder is wrong, I'm not actually making a declarative statement, even though formally it appears that way. I'm just saying boo on murder, or hooray, giving money to charity, or yay, giving money to charity, right? Or something like that.
You're basically just expressing an emotion or desire, not actually.
Yeah, but it'd be much better. I think if that's what you intended to mean, you shouldn't be saying murder is wrong. You should be saying I dislike murder or something.
Well,
so whoever's offering that statement is being very imprecise and ought to get a kicking.
Well, that's
Are you being imprecise to say that the sun rises?
It's a.
Well, yeah, yes and no.
No, yeah, but is it imprecise?
No, that's because there's an equivocation on rises. That's all that says.
But, well, I think many people.
I see that, Joe.
No, it's not being imprecise.
I think many people will agree that there is something implausible about non-cognitivist views, or that's been a standard challenge to non-cognitivist views in metaethics, is that it just doesn't seem very plausible that people would be using the language this way if, in fact, all they were doing was issuing disguised commands or disguised emotive expressions, right? So that is a standard objection that has been raised in the past. But, in philosophy, these things get very sophisticated, because when people raise those challenges, philosophers tend to be very resourceful and sort of figuring out ways to get around that.
I mean, this is almost like saying murder is wrong is equivalent to saying today's Sunday if you interpret it enough. It seems like a fuss about nothing to me, I'm afraid.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is when let's say you see someone murdering someone, or you see someone killing someone. We'll start with just killing. And you either issue a command or a state of proposition. Command stop doing that, or the proposition you shouldn't be doing that. And their response is, why should I stop, or what's wrong with what I'm doing? That, I think, is where the meat is. That's where we kind of start hashing out exactly what we're talking about when we say something is or isn't moral.
See, there's a number of options.
There yet.
There's a number of options available to you, right? So what we want to first clarify is a semantic issue, and then there's a metaphysical or ontological issue, right? Semantic issue is, how do we understand moral statements? Do we understand them to be cognitive, which is to say expressing propositions, or do we understand them to be non-cognitive, and therefore they are formally declarative, right? But in fact, there should not be construed that way, right? So that's the semantic question, right? Now, and then there are people who actually will argue that there's no consistency to the way people use moral language. So these people are called I think they're called moral incoherentists, right? They just want to say sometimes people use language in an emotive or prescriptivist way, and sometimes they're actually making declarative claims. And so you can't really just imagine that there's some kind of consistency in the uses that people make of moral language, right? So you know that's one question you would want to sort out. But then if you decided you were a cognitivist, right, that wouldn't actually commit you to thinking that there really are these properties, right? Because the not all cognitivists are realists. The non-realist cognitivists are called moral error theorists, and they have the view that yes, people are making a propositional claim when they say they are expressing a proposition when they say rape is wrong. They are trying to say there's a something like there's a property that rape has, which is this property of wrongness, right? But they just want to deny that there is anything in the world that answers to that description. There is any property of that kind that answers that description, right? So it's kind of like the analogy sometimes made with witches, right? People talk about witches, right? But if you're an anti-realist about witches, right? If somebody says, you know, so-and-so is a witch and they're sincere, right? They're just mistaken about some claim that they're making, right? Because if there are no witches, then they're just wrong to think that that person is a witch. Similarly, moral error theorists want to say that whenever people say something is right or wrong, they're making they're expressing a proposition, but it's just nothing actually answers to that description in the world. And so they're systematically mistaken in their moral thought, because there just aren't any moral properties. So that's, I think, the distinction that I was trying to get at before when we were saying, you know, if you are drawn to anti-realism, you sort of, I think, are going to want to try to sort out exactly what strand of anti-realism you think makes the most sense.
Nah.
Yeah, I think if we delve too deeply into ambiguous natures of statements like murder is wrong, I think we're going to take us off track, I think.
Jack, which form of anti-realism is? I mean, error theory seems it's persuasive because it's also pretty intuitive. General, which form of anti-realism would be the most persuasive to you?
You're talking to who?
I want to know, Max. What would be the?
Well, in the past, I've defended an atomistic or Aristotelian viewpoint on the matter, but now that I'm actually looking into pragmatic philosophy, I think there's actually another way to split the fact-value distinction, such that you could actually have ethical statements which could be factual, so long as they follow the criteria of truth set out by the pragmatic definition. So it delves a little into epistemology, but that's kind of where I'm looking at it right now. I've also looked at developing it through a Lockean normative ethic as well.
Mm.
All right, well, I'm going to head out, guys. It was a great discussion. All right.
You're done being lambasted?
Yes, I'm done being roasted. Alex showed me that I was contradicting myself, and rather than admit to it, I'm going to go do 20 hangouts while Alex is a poo-poo head. So he can
You're
take
an error
that
theorist
and
now.
shove it up his polite English booty.
JD, you're an error theorist now.
All right, sure, why not?
Sticking your neck out there and helping us.
We didn't really cover quasi-realism, did we?
Honestly, the fact that I contradict myself doesn't really surprise me in this case. Just when it comes to morality, I'm just so all over the place right now. I'll eventually nail something down, or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just keep bouncing around because it is one of those subjects where it's when you're trying to find a fact that you're not, where the hell do you go?
Well, Alex did say that you couldn't necessarily find some error-free philosophy. You just have to make do with the least error-prone one you can
Not
find.
even error, just I want a fact to start with, and I want to start with, well, maybe it has a definition, but then there's other things that kind of screw with it. Hopefully more of these talks will help me get a better idea of where I'm at and where I'm heading.
Honestly, you should just sacrifice your ontological commitments and just be a Platonist.
Oh, fuck! I hate Platonist. No, ugh,
Sword
I hate
Platonists.
Yes,
Sword
all this
Platonism.
stuff exists in some nebulous third dimension.
Yeah,
No, that's capital P Platonism. I mean some small p Platonism.
If it's any way related to the big capital P Platonism, it's bollocks. That's too close to close for comfort.
Well, anyway, yeah, thanks all for having me, and it's been a great talk.
Glad you came, JD. Thanks.
Thanks, Lena.
Later, JD.
It's like we killed your hangout, Helena.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've got to go as well, Helena. But anyways, that was great fun. And
Well, we've been here an awfully long time, and I've got a kid staring at me, tapping her foot. So I'll go ahead and close it out too. But we'll definitely do more of these. We'll get a little bit more technical and maybe a little bit more organized after I do a little reading. I'm talking with people before we start. But I definitely wanted to do this one so we could get our feet wet.
Yes, we're definitely damp.
Yeah, damp. So thank you, everybody.